Good morning. I'd like to, just for the record, say I was on time this morning. I got to listen to a pretty long speech there. I'd like to thank my good friend Harold for that wonderful introduction. And as you know, he began his firefighting career in Virginia, and it was very kind of you to invite me to join you today. It's been a while since I've spoken to your group, but I think I can safely say that I'm still the only person ever elected to statewide office in Virginia with a union card, 2 Purple Hearts, and 3 tattoos. It's good to be back with friends. You know, on the wall in my house, to this day, there's a photo that was on the front page of the Washington Post on November the 10th, 2006, the morning after we were declared the winner of probably the most highly contested Senate race in the country, defeating an entrenched incumbent, bringing a Democratic majority to the United States Senate. The photo was taken at a massive, spontaneous rally at the Arlington County Courthouse. My wife hung, stands on one side, a little more than 8 months pregnant. Chuck Schumer stands on the other side, and behind me and around me in that one tight photograph, there were 5 firefighters holding up signs saying "Firefighters for Webb." You helped me get there. We worked hard together after I got there, and I have to say, honestly, you're the only group that I know that has ever out-hustled Chuck Schumer into the center of a photograph. And I'm here today to say I may call on you again, so stay tuned. I stand before you as a card-carrying, lifetime union member. Committed supporter of collective bargaining rights. You all know it's easy for people to come over here and say this, but when it comes to the importance of collective bargaining rights, I can fairly say, and I think Harold was good to point some of these things out, I've taken the risks at the time when union membership too often has been vilified and misunderstood. As Harold mentioned, Virginia is a right-to-work state. I think about 4.9% of the workers in Virginia are union members. But I am the only candidate for statewide office in the history of Virginia to walk a picket line during a campaign, as I did in 2006 with the Goodyear workers in Danville. My first official trip as a senator was to the General Motors powertrain plant in Fredericksburg. I supported federal assistance to the automobile industry. I visited workers on the picket line at the Volvo plant in Dublin, Virginia. I voted to give firefighters and other public safety officers collective bargaining rights. And I opposed amendments too numerous to mention, which sought to undermine the fundamental collective bargaining rights of workers, or to make it harder than it already is to join a union. These positions may not have been universally popular, but they reflect my strong feelings that collective bargaining rights are essential to the health of much of the American economy. I'm especially thankful to be with you this morning because it gives me a chance to talk about an area where I feel a special bond with firefighters and other first responders. Everyone in this room knows what it's like to undertake a duty that might give you not the choice, but the obligation to step into harm's way. I spent time as an infantry Marine on a particularly harsh battlefield. I've covered military conflict in Beirut and Afghanistan. I visited Iraq as a member of the United States Senate, and among these 3 capacities, there's a vital distinction. I've often mentioned it to colleagues in the Senate. It defines the most sobering aspect of duty. Simply stated, and I think everyone in this room understands, You don't know what it's like to be there unless you're faced with the reality that when things go really bad, you're not allowed to leave. I suppose there's a lot of people who say they've seen firefighters fight a fire, but there aren't very many people who can say they fought a fire. I used to say when I was in the Senate, when a lot of my colleagues would say that they've been to Iraq and Afghanistan many, many times, dropping in on a war isn't quite the same thing as fighting a war. And this leads me to the guiding principle of leadership for those of us who have endured these kinds of realities, and it is take care of your people. Take care of your people, and they will take care of you. I was lucky as a young man to have had the honor of serving as an infantry Marine in Vietnam. This was a very hard time for our country. During the year that I was in Vietnam, 1969, which became known for the Battle of Hamburger Hill, among other things, we lost twice as many combat dead in 1 year than we have lost in Iraq and Afghanistan combined in the last 12 years of a war. On the average, about 200 Americans were dying every week during that entire year. And I watched young Marines do astounding things on a daily basis. That guiding principle sustained us. Take care of your people. There's an old Marine Corps tradition. First you feed the privates, then you feed the corporals, then you feed the sergeants, and if anything's left over, then the officers eat. Unfortunately, when it comes to corporate America, in recent times, these basic guiding principles have been turned on their heads. First you pay the deal makers, then you pay the CEOs, then you pay the aspiring CEOs, and if anything's left over, you give it to the working people. This is not sour grapes, and it is not a cheap shot. It is the reality of our current system, and it has got to stop. When I graduated from the Naval Academy, corporate CEOs made about 20 times what the average worker made. Today, it's more than 300 times, probably closer to 400 times. And this isn't the result of globalization. The average Japanese CEO makes about 10 times what the average worker makes. The average German CEO makes about 11 times. And by the way, Germany, not China, has the highest balance of trade of any country in the world. And union members have long sat on corporate boards in Germany. Maybe if our working people sat on corporate boards, there would be more money spent on salaries, health care, pensions, training programs, instead of the outrageous sums that are now going to many CEOs. I believe in the American dream. I have lived it. I believe that people should have the opportunity to shoot the moon, particularly those who, let's say, help our society be a better place by finding a cure for a pernicious disease like polio, or forever changing the way we communicate, like the internet. But when a corporate CEO can make hundreds of millions of dollars a year, in one case just last year, reported in the Wall Street Journal last week, $690 million in 1 year, doing what is often called boardroom capitalism, buying and selling other companies, while the structure of our workforce is declining, while part-time jobs are often becoming the rule that don't often protect health insurance or pension rights. I think our political leaders should have the courage and the vision to say enough is enough, and to stand up to the financial sector that has been growing ever more powerful in the impact of both political parties. During my time in the Senate, I spoke frequently about the need to reinstitute true economic fairness. A lot of political leaders will give lip service to this concept, but the truth is in the numbers. Every month, every year, every deal, financial contribution by financial contribution, those at the very top have pulled further away from the rest of our society. In the first months of the Obama administration, as we all know, our country was hit by a terrible, devastating recession brought on by outright greed and irresponsibility in the financial sector. We bailed them out in the United States Congress. The alternative was clear, a catastrophic free fall in the entire global economy. Let me say this more clearly. The firefighters, the nurses, the truck drivers, the soldiers, the inventive sole proprietors got hit with a $700 billion tax bill in order to stanch the bleeding of our economy and get the bankers back on their feet again. And what has happened since? The stock market, which bottomed out in April of 2009, just above 6,000, has tripled to almost 18,000. In fact, it's been 18,000. Yesterday it closed at 17,995. But wages and salaries have actually declined, as has the approval rate for small business loans. Working people bailed them out, and it's working pretty well for them. So here's where we are in the America of today. If you hold stocks, if you have capital assets, chances are you're doing fine. In fact, the moneyed interests are doing so well that many commentators believe we're on our way to establishing an entrenched aristocracy. 16,000 families make up the richest 0.01%, controlling about 11% of our total wealth. That's back to the share in 1916, 100 years ago, when we started turning things around again for a while. 16,000 families hold $6 trillion in assets, which is equal to the assets held by the bottom two-thirds of our country as a whole. If you're on the other side of the equation, working people, it's pretty tough. The Pew Research Center reports that for most U.S. workers, real wages have been flat or even falling for decades. The average wage peaked about 40 years ago. The economy is creating more jobs, and that's good. But what kind of jobs are we seeing? For too many, the jobs are service sector jobs that don't pay enough money for workers to support themselves and their families. We keep losing better paying jobs. It's a feature of these recessions that too often the good jobs don't come back when the recessions end. The grand bargain that has been the foundation of our society is simple. You work hard, elect leaders who will insist on a fair chance for you to succeed, you'll have a good income, you'll have a comfortable life. This simple concept is now at risk. I encourage every one of you to put this question to anyone who asks for your vote. Will you stand up to the powerful financial interests who are going to spend billions of dollars in order to elect people who think the current drift toward a permanent aristocracy is okay? Or will you have the courage to provide a voice in the corridors of power for those who otherwise will have no voice? The working people who are carrying the load of this country on their backs with every tax bill that they pay. Will you look for ways to enable the future of the marginalized who need a helping hand to become productive citizens, the incapacitated, the undereducated, the formerly incarcerated, all of whom right now are too often being simply dismissed as permanent liabilities, but who with the right leadership and vision can find a way to give back and make us stronger. Do you believe that's possible? I do. But even that's not enough. We need the good jobs and wages that can be found in infrastructure development, in manufacturing. Every $1 billion that's spent on infrastructure project creates tens of thousands of jobs. This is a good deal for our workers. It's a good deal for our country. We are way behind the infrastructure programs, folks. A modern economy requires modern infrastructure. Our strained infrastructure was given a D+ by the American Society of Civil Engineers. But there's an opportunity there. We've got to put good people to work, renewing and strengthening our schools, roads, bridges, communications infrastructure, and in the process, increasing our global competitiveness. We need to place renewed emphasis on our public education systems, and including the often overlooked area of adult education, which I focused heavily on when I was in the Senate. Adult education right now is not keeping pace with so many of our workers' needs to meet the modern workplace's requirements. 29% of adults read at about an 8th grade level in this country or below, and of those, about 43% tend to live in poverty. We have the hardest working and most productive workforce in the world, but we need to remove obstacles facing working families. Tens of millions of Americans struggle to care for a family's immediate needs while continuing to work. Working people should not be forced to choose between their families and their future. Better access to affordable and dependable child care, affordable housing, dependable transportation, more predictable work schedules. In our country, it's not uncommon for devastating life events inside a family to be coupled with financial hardship. We need to reform our criminal justice system from point of apprehension to length of sentencing to prison administration to reentry into society. During my time in the Senate, we brought this issue out of the shadows and into the public debate. We forced it into the public debate. I remember when I was talking about this issue during the Senate campaign, and my Democratic Party advisors were coming up and saying, you can't talk about mass incarceration. It is a political suicide venture in Virginia. And I said, how can you not talk about this? We have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's known prison population. There's only two possibilities here. Either we're the most evil people on earth or we're doing something wrong. And it's a leadership question, not a political question. Millions of Americans right now, particularly because of the way drug policies have been handled over the past 30 years, are either in prison or under some sort of post-prison supervision. Some are hardened criminals. Others have been incarcerated for the sickness of drug abuse or mental illness or because they did something really, really stupid in a moment of culpable but accountability stupidity. Most would like to reenter the community that they left behind when they were locked up, neglected, possibly abused, and definitely marked for the rest of their lives every time they fill out an employment application. Do we want these people to reenter a life of crime, to be prowling our streets at night, back again in prison, uselessly stagnating while costing taxpayers billions of dollars? Or is it possible to see a good percentage of them building productive lives, making an income, paying taxes, and living a stable existence? I believe it is in the interest of every American to create pathways for former offenders to get away from the stigma of incarceration, if they're willing to do so, and to move into productive lives for themselves and for their community. These are just a few examples of the types of issues that don't really ring up the cash registers of the big campaign donors when you go out and run for office, but they'll make us a better country and a better people and a more fair society. Courageous leaders don't follow the money. They lead, they take risks, they propose new directions, and in time, the people will follow them. I'm not a Catholic, but quite frankly, there's no better example of the impact of this kind of courage than the moral leadership we have been seeing from Pope Francis, whose wisdom and sense of justice has inspired so many people around the world, including me. So let me end today by again expressing my thanks to all of you for having answered the call of duty. Let's just imagine for a moment that this is March of 2001 rather than March of 2015. We would be having the same conversation. None of us imagining that 6 months later the World Trade Center and the Pentagon would be devastated and then members of your profession would be marching into the hell of the resulting infernos while other citizens were understandably doing everything they could to flee. I know that feeling. I know what it's like to face a determined enemy and to know without hesitation that I must move forward into the guns of battle, or I wouldn't be taking care of my people and I would not be doing my duty. This is a life you all have chosen. We as Americans benefit from that choice every day in the knowledge that you are motivated, highly skilled, and ready to face those kinds of dangers. And it is the duty of our country's leaders to make sure that you have the tools to do your job, as well as the benefits that are equal to the risks that you are taking and the price that you are willing to pay. We do live in the greatest country on earth. That's why people from all over the world want to come here. God bless America, and thank you for doing your part to preserve our greatness. Thank you very much.